everybody, grab some good lunch. I'm sure people will be filtering in. So I'm Roger Bruce. This is actually a very unique panel for me to be hosting because quite often people will say, I'm the man with two first names. We've got Matt Allison from SureWeb, the man with two first names. We've got O'Neill Taylor, the man with two first names. And Terry. Terry, thanks, Steve. So I'll do a quick introduction and then each panelist will introduce themselves and then we'll get into the questions and answers. We've obviously got some pre-canned stuff to go through today, but please, 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 any questions you've got, jump in. My good friend Javier at the back is going to help facilitate the questions, so if you've got a question, put up your hand, he'll track you down. We've got some great expertise on the panel, so please, the more interactive is, the better the session will be. So, without further ado, Mr. Matt Allison.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. My name is Matt Allison. Multiple decades in the channel industry, so I do have a specialty in S&P, but my role for the last 15 years or so has been as an Azure architect. I worked for a channel distributor for a number of years, then I worked for Microsoft for a number of years, and now I represent SureWeb as part of our Azure pre-sales solution building team. So,
thanks, Matt. And a valued client from Gulf Canada, Mr. O'Neill Taylor.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is O'Neill Taylor. I am the IT manager at Gulf Canada. I'm the customer on the stage, so that's kind of my role. So for those of you, everyone asks, what does Gulf Canada do? We are actually the equivalent. We're the national sports organization for golf in the country. Our equivalent would be Hockey Canada or Soccer Canada, etc. But yeah, our goal is to increase participation in golf. What I do at Golf Canada, I'm 50% of the IT department. My colleague Balaj is here, and we kind of do everything. So you name it, from my technical standpoint, that's something we kind of cover. And yeah, that's what I do.
Great, thanks O'Neill. And finally, Terry Repstein.
Yeah, so I'm Terry Repstein with the Quadbridge Professional Services team, and so our role in the organization is to work with customers and basically do project type work where there's a defined objective, a business requirement, look at what kind of technical solutions might fit that need, and basically go through design, implementation, migration, and so on. I specialize on the virtualization side, so 20 years almost in the industry working with VMware, Citrix VDI, moving into Azure design and deployment now, Azure migrations, all that kind of stuff.
Great, thanks Terry. So on to the questions. First question is for Matt. Actually, before we get to the questions, I just want to talk very quickly. So why are we talking about this today? You've heard throughout the day, including with Steve's kickoff this morning, the importance of the client feedback and the surveys that we do. This drives, the data drives the sessions, and one of the things that came in very clear from those surveys, of the customers that are in the cloud, 53% of them that responded to the survey are already in Azure, so Azure is clearly top of mind for our customers. So Matt, if you don't mind, it's a little awkward, I apologize turning around to read these questions, but as customers are going through the migrations, what are some of the challenges and considerations that they have to address?
good question. So it's a very broad answer, unfortunately. So yeah, with Azure migrations, as I'm sure most of you know in the room, there's no cookie cutter answer. It really comes down to, I would say, the number one thing to take away from this is to clearly define what your objectives are. Because a migration to the cloud or a migration to Azure isn't always the best answer. There are a lot of features, there are a lot of benefits to this type of move, and it is something that I think is an inevitability in our industry in the long term. But short term is bring to your consultation clearly defined goals. From that point forward, identifying which challenges you'll face and how to overcome them becomes just a lot clearer, a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm glad you landed on those clear definitions. Terry's got a lot of scar tissue from projects, and I'm sure you do as well, and O'Neill, where maybe things were not well defined to start, or the goalposts changed through the project, and so having that clear understanding and goal up front really helps with the success. Thanks, Matt. Terry, what do you see some of the key differences as people are evaluating on-prem versus cloud? We heard this morning, you know, there's no one answer, there's no one tool, but what are organizations considering as those differences?
I think some of the biggest differences is just the impact of sort of improper management. So in the past, you'd have a data center, you'd have your virtual infrastructure, you might have some server sprawl where people are provisioning and kind of forgetting about test dev environments or spinning things up and maybe not monitoring resource consumption and that sort of thing. Where with an Azure infrastructure, that directly affects your charges per month, right? So if you have a team spinning up some resources, they forget about that test dev environment, or maybe they're throwing resources at a problem when it's not even really a resource consumption thing, that's going to come back on your bill, and if you're not monitoring that, that's something that can easily get away from you. I always joke, I constantly am buying Microsoft stock anytime I can, because this is a classic thing that we see customers forget. And so it's that constant monitoring and sort of review of your environment, and then seeing how you can take advantage of new offerings from Microsoft. There's constantly new instance sizes or different technologies that are available in the platform, and these can help drive down your costs. So it's not something that you sort of set it up and walk away. It's something that you need to actively look at. And I guess the other big one is really around security. Obviously security's front and center in everyone's mind. You can't really treat it as a perimeter security anymore. It's not like a data center with your hardened firewalls around it. Like literally this thing by default is cloud or like internet facing. It's available from anywhere, anytime. So it takes a different mindset to secure that. And so as you look for moving an on-premise environment to a cloud sort of deployment, these are some of the top things I would think about.
Fantastic, thanks Terry. So O'Neill, you've been actually on the journey recently. Yeah. You've got a very interesting story to tell. So tell us about the journey and what kind of got you started down the path and how it's going, please.
So it was a bit ironic. I was actually at this event last year thinking about going to the cloud and what we need to do for my organization. And you know, obviously in the panels last year hearing about VMware renewals and whatnot, and we are actually relocating our offices at the end of this year. I think, you know, speaking with some other IT managers and colleagues, as well as QuadBridge representatives, it just made sense for my organization to kind of migrate over to the cloud. We actually were maybe 50% already in Azure, so we were using you know, Exchange and Teams and whatnot. So really, what we have on site for on-prem is your traditional Active Directory file server and your Azure Sync application. So, you know, just with the ease of the move, it just made sense to kind of transition everything over to the cloud. So, ironically, after QBITS last year, it was one of those things where I called my car rep up and I'm like, okay, let's kind of start down this project. And so we're actively doing it right now. I mean, I would say it's easier said than done. We're scraping our knees a little bit, but we're getting the way through. But yeah, it's been one of those journeys where I'm hoping to have this done before I move, because I don't want to be moving a data center to a new office. So that's kind of where our journey is at this point. So
thanks, O'Neill, and that really bridged well with Terry's answer on-prem versus cloud. So you've got a very real impact with your physical move occurring and what's driving it. So and to have the process start with QBITS last year is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's just a bit ironic that it happened that way, wouldn't it?
Thanks, O'Neill. So Matt, back to you. We've heard already, and I'm sure we'll hear a significant amount more over the next day and a half around AI, automation, as it relates to the cloud workloads moving to Azure. What would you tell the crew here, the team here, about considerations for AI and automation? Do you have an hour?
Yeah, AI are my two least favorite letters in the English alphabet. AI has a lot of capability and it has a lot of potential. What I have found, obviously this varies with customer size, it varies with industry, whatever, but what I have found is a lot of the solutions, automation, better customer experience, data intelligence, things like that, there are non-AI alternatives to consider. And I know that might sound obvious to some of you, but to a lot of, let's say, CTOs or other executives in the room, the fact that you would recommend anything other than AI can often, get negative looks. So that is probably the first bit of advice that I consult customers with, which is, again, it's identifying the objective. If the objective is for real-time analytics, you can do that today with Synapse, for example. Now, Synapse has an AI integration, but it's not necessarily, you don't have to suddenly start training an LLM if you want to use AI. So I would say, anecdotally, that's my response to that, is to address these from a broader sort of solution-based and see what technologies take you to that goal. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Matt. And just to follow up on that, so you talked about AI and some of the tool set. Any examples or experiences you've seen around automation and how customers have applied some automation to improve?
So it depends. If we're talking about automating routine tasks, yes, but that is something, that especially folks that have been dealing with Azure for a long time, Azure Automation, for example, is a resource or is a service that's available through Azure that does not include AI, but it'll allow you to automate a lot of common tasks, billing and invoicing and the like. That said, you can utilize OpenAI to sort of create a model around that data and come up with insights that you didn't otherwise think. In other words, there's a combination to these technologies where using existing stuff and some of the newer stuff can lead you to your goals.
Fantastic, thanks, Matt. So, title of this session is What's Now and What's Next? Terry, I'd be interested, and this is kind of a non-committal answer, I'll be clear about that, but what are you keeping an eye on? What trends are you watching right now and have your attention?
I think the big sort of trend that I'm seeing is a lot of people have adopted Azure. Initially is, okay, lift and shift our infrastructure out of our physical data center, move it up to the cloud, take advantage of moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model, not have to worry about hardware refreshes and all that kind of stuff. But really, I think the value of the cloud is that there's all these other sort of services that, like Matt was talking about, available at your fingertips. You don't need to now sort of provision some infrastructure if you want to start testing some automation or AI or whatnot. That's a service. You can literally pilot this stuff. It's at your fingertips, and you can decide if there's value for you, or you can sort of scale it back or do that as needed. And then the other big trend that I'm seeing is away from sort of monolithic VMs, things obviously like containers and so on, but serverless computing, logic apps, function apps, all these different ways of leveraging Azure, sort of what they call native cloud services. So like ideally you're wanting to leverage SaaS, like software as a service, or PaaS, which is platform as a service, and you kind of get more value at the higher levels rather than dropping down to spinning up a good old-fashioned Windows server, deploying some software, running updates on that. So as you move to the cloud, you want to start to get away from this idea that you're maintaining it like you would have done in a VMware environment, for example.
That's a great comment. Let me just add to that too. He's absolutely right, but I would consider it a phased approach, especially if you're talking about an organization that has been going through the same refresh cycle for decades now, and especially if their users are they oppose change. Is lift and shift is not a negative first phase. Talk about what this environment would look exactly the same hosted in this environment, and then schedule 6 months down the road after monitoring that environment to consider modernization approaches. So as you mentioned, SaaSifying is a big thing, containerizing, but then looking at alternatives as well, finding out where your biggest costs are and approaching them. So it's I've been talking about cloud for 15 years now. It is not anything new, but it is, to me, still the most fundamental important part of this is its dynamic, flexible nature. The idea that you can make changes on the fly to continue to optimize. I find it to be exciting from an IT perspective that you are not just setting and forgetting it anymore. It is a constant work through. Every day you can check out new reports and see if what your utilization percentages are and make changes, etc.
So, sorry.
Yeah, it's really just the idea of what's next, right? And so, like you said, lift and shift is often the sort of entry point for a lot of organizations. Let's take advantage of sort of decommissioning our data center and taking advantage of the cloud. But then once you're there, this whole world is open and available for you. There's so many things that are literally in the Azure marketplace from the other providers. And so that's where you're not limited now that, oh, I want to try something out. I need to go make some procurement and do a big proposal for the CFO to show value. I may be able to trial this really out the gate and then see what fits moving down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, and I appreciate the top up there. It's interesting you said you can't just set it and forget it. That's a saying we've got internally as well. The days of set it and forget it are long gone, as both Terry and Matt have talked, that those resources can easily scale and your bills just go up and up. So we actually have a weekly call with one of our customers, reviewing the performance of their environment, making sure they've got the right resource allocation so that they've got the productivity levels where they need it, but they're not overpaying for it. So great top up. Well, Neil, I'm going to come back to you as our valued customer, and I'm going to throw you a question that maybe you're not prepared for. So by all means, take a second to think. I'd just be interested to hear from you, and I'm sure the crowd would as well. As you've been on this journey, what was the biggest surprise or lesson that you've learned and picked up?
I would say going to the cloud in theory makes sense, but in practicality it does not. That would be the kind of the easiest answer. I mean, t-shirt. Listen, you get there and you're like, okay, we're going to jump on this platform, but then you realize, you have a wrong GPO and this doesn't get transferred over, and you have to, even just one of the challenges for us of getting files from, file server over to SharePoint or OneDrive, that in itself is a challenge, right? Because you're trying not to break your end user's experience, but you want to get the data over there because you see the benefit of doing it. The second thing I would say is, like even now, one of the big things for us is where we are currently is we're trying to get our wireless environments to a PKI, basically a certificate / OAuth lookup within Azure, and that in itself is not that simple because there's all these components that you need to add to make that work, and that's kind of one of the challenges we're going through now. So I would say just going down the journey, there's just a lot of gotchas. You don't necessarily realize, this is going to work, and in theory, yes, it makes sense, but when you get to that specific part, you have to kind of pivot, figure out what's going to work to make your environment work the way it is now. So.
Okay, so can I get an A+ on that answer that he was not prepared in? Absolutely. Great, O'Neill. Do we have any questions? Just as we keep an eye on the time, we've got a couple other questions for the panel, but questions from the audience. Please, go ahead. Yeah.
Great organization to change and also dealing with security model, and how are you preparing your organization?
I mean, it's a good question. I would say for our org, a lot of what we have is mostly emails and files. A lot of our other applications, thankfully, we're already in the cloud. So for us, it wasn't too much of a transition. It was just, again, for us, it was maintaining the same experience that they have now. So I use the example of files. Again, we were in an environment on-prem where we had Roman profiles, right? And getting that to OneDrive, you want to be seamless, but again, that didn't necessarily happen. So I think for us, it's been a lot of communication, and then a lot of trial and error. I would say we actually test a lot of what we try to do before we actually push it down to our end users, and that's kind of been working for us at this point. But again, we're still, challenges present themselves, so you just kind of pivot and move forward, right? So.
Any challenges with Wi-Fi?
Our file server wasn't tremendously big, so we're kind of, this is why one of the reasons why we went to the cloud to begin with. It didn't make sense not to, right? Just based on the way the organization is. So I would say, do we have large files? Yes and no. So, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a challenge right now that we're facing. So.
Great questions, thank you. Anybody else? Yes?
So obviously it moves from CapEx to OpEx, but have you done like an analysis of annualized costs? You get rid of your hardware, your renewals, and your license, but you haven't looked within. What's your 5-year spend? Regardless of what budget?
So to be honest, obviously when we did the initial analysis, I think the OpEx would in the long term be slightly more than the CapEx. Obviously you're paying for an asset that's depreciating, right? At some point you're not really, you're paying more so for service to keep that piece of equipment going. But I mean, you have to look at I think with this situation, you have to look at other aspects of it as well. I mean, going to an OpEx model, I don't have to worry about patching servers anymore. That's one thing I don't necessarily have to do. We're actually trying to go right to Entra ID. We're trying to do completely away with all of our server environment. So we're just going to a purely licensing model where I don't need to worry about patching the server. I just need to worry about having a firewall, some access points, and some switches. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think in the long term, it's just the flexibility of what our environment will be able to do in our staff, especially the nature of what our staff do now. A lot of our staff are remote, especially during the golf season. They're not actually in an office. So getting staff to go on VPN, to do updates and whatnot, it's just becoming more of a challenge, whereas now we can push something through into it and away it goes. We don't need to worry about that. So again, we haven't completely done the analysis, but I think in the long term, it just makes more sense for our organization to go this route.
So good answer. You got a good answer from Terry here. I think there's another question in the back there. Yes? Just throw the mic.
So did you consider like a hybrid approach with your on-premise also for your Active Directory, or did you just like lift and shift?
For us, no, I mean, yes, I did explore potentially just lifting and shifting everything over, but again, I don't want to have to maintain Active Directory. If Entra does the job for us, then why am I going to do that? I think there's more benefits, again, especially now with the admin center on O365, I can provisionally use it right in there. I don't have to worry about a sync happening and all that fun stuff. It just happens in real time, right? So for us, I mean, we explored it, but it didn't make sense. I think in the long term, it just made sense just to go purely cloud, right? So,
Yeah, I would say from a technical perspective, the biggest shift is going to be from a GPO to Azure policy perspective. GPOs are not something that Entra can utilize. So if you are a heavy group policy directory, and let's say you have legacy applications or whatever, legacy systems that need to be accessed using that policy, the best practice is a hybrid solution, which can be in the cloud entirely, but you would need to run a domain controller maintaining those GPOs.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, please. Yeah, Will. Get your steps in today, G here.
So I was going to say, that's something I look at myself, is say you have like a 50 virtual machine on-prem cluster, and you're looking at a lift and shift into the cloud. For me, I find, I get an apprehension, what if the cost is double? I've got large quantity of storage, large databases. And one thing I look at is all of the different Azure services. I mean, surely, maybe instead of running a virtual machine running SQL Server, maybe I'm going to leverage the options. What would you guys say? I mean, one thing I find is you have to become such an expert on all the different Azure services in order to understand that, this specific niche one would fit perfectly here. How would you guys say, what's the best way to go about that?
I guess ultimately that's why we're here to help. And so yeah, there's a lot of options in Azure for sure. And it's really going to be about understanding what feature sets you're looking for. There's whole matrices of different SQL features that you may or may not get that would result in you going in a managed instance or SQL database, or having to run SQL within a VM to achieve that feature. So it's not a simple answer, unfortunately. From the cost perspective, there's lots of options in terms of reserved instances and savings plans, and so you can try and predict what your kind of costs will look like for the next 3 years or whatnot.
I would say that's absolutely right, but I would one extra step in there, assessment. So if anybody here isn't familiar, Microsoft offers a free assessment tool through their Azure Migrate service. So all you need for this is an Azure subscription, which is free in itself, and then you create an Azure Migrate project. Within that project, it then allows you to download the agent tool that you would install locally on a server, and then it monitors that environment for however long you'd like to run it, ideally during the most peak utilization time, and then that report is, it's mana for my job to provide as accurate an estimate as I possibly can. And then there's still going to be a little bit of gray there too, so just keep it in mind.
Just one more comment on that too. And so we work with customers doing the Azure migrate assessment all the time. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term right sizing. So instead of looking at apples to apples, like, hey, I've got this 16 core, 64 gig of RAM virtual machine, this thing's gonna cost $1 million a month to put up in Azure. The Azure migrate tool goes through and assesses what is the actual CPU utilization, what's the RAM utilization, what's the 95th percentile, so you can actually do a kind of an estimate based on what is the actual sizes I would likely need if I move to Azure.
Great, I think we've got time for one more. Don't be shy. No? Okay, please.
That's a question for O'Neill. So what would be the best approach if we are working in an environment that is integrated with both OT and IT technology? Should we go hybrid approach or should we go cloud?
I don't even know if I can answer that question now.
Everybody can pick it up.
I would probably defer that to one of the experts here. So.
I think like during the keynote, the whole graphic of like, here's a saw, here's a hammer, here's a screwdriver. It's not one tool for everything. I don't know if we're gonna get, like one of the questions that I gave Roger, like is on-prem dead? And I think far from it. Like it's gonna depend what your workloads require, what kind of latency or big storage. We talk about edge computing is kind of, in my mind, still very much an on-premise scenario. So it really depends what you're doing. And with OT, obviously, there might be a lot of edge components, and it's not likely to be a cloud-only solution, quite frankly, right? It's going to be some kind of hybrid, or maybe.
It's probably obvious, but bandwidth too is something that we run into all the time. At least, so if you can't tell from my accent, I'm American, so I'm sorry.
Now you're Canadian. Just for apologizing, you're now Canadian. I'm sorry, eh?
Yes, we have a number of rural customers, and as much as they'd love to give broadband to rural regions in the United States, we still don't have it. And so, yeah, in my opinion, on-prem is never going to go away. It is another tool in our toolbox, and it only applies to the right solutions. So, yeah, it's the long answer to your question.
Thanks.
Fantastic, thanks so much. So we are at time. I want to thank Terry Repstein, our good friend Matt Allison, and O'Neill Taylor with the A+ answer today. So thank you. Thanks for attending. As you can see, we've got a broad base of skills here. Unfortunately, Matt has to get on a plane, but feel free to pick Terry's brain, pick O'Neill's brain, ask me, I'll get you to the right person. Enjoy your sessions. Thanks so much, folks.